Scott, thanks for joining me and doing this conversation. Real quick, give me your background as a professional photographer. I have an idea that you've been doing this for a while.
Absolutely, yes. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. Big Chicago White Sox fan. And my dad was a tire dealer, but I did not want to do that for a living. So I just kind of fell into photography. Um, got a part-time job at a small paper in the neighborhood I grew up in back in 1986. And then a year later, that newspaper got bought out by a bigger newspaper, a suburban paper, who covered professional sports. And I pretty much became a photographer because of my love of sports. And the timing was perfect because I got to photograph Michael Jordan throughout his entire run with the Chicago Bulls, and then spent my final 13 years in Chicago at the Chicago Tribune, not just doing sports, but doing all of other things too, news, features, long-term
hmm
projects. And then I got to a job offer for the San Francisco Chronicle in 2014 and moved out here just in time for the Warriors to explode. So I think me and Steve Kerr are the only ones to photograph the Bulls winning 72, or to be there when the Bulls won 72 and the Warriors winning 73. Um, but as a White Sox fan, I spent a lot of my youth at Comiskey Park. And I started as a photographer like 2 or 3 years before it was knocked down, but I wasn't really aware photographically then. So I didn't do like a story on the last days at Comiskey Park. And it's something I've always regretted. And in the early 2000s, I saw a book by a photographer named Peter Elliott who photographed at Comiskey Park in the summer of 1977. And he had a book called Park Life. And it wasn't a photo of like the White Sox or really even the stadium. It was just the fans. And this was back before fans wore like a jersey and a hat to every game. A butcher would come after work to a White Sox game, or the family would come from church on a Sunday. So it was just these great South Side faces. And so for me, that was like, oh man, I missed my opportunity, but at least some photographer documented Comiskey Park,
Yeah.
how I remember it. So when I went to my first Oakland A's game in 2014 at the Coliseum, I'm like, wow, this is Comiskey to me. It was a concrete stadium, no frills, super passionate fan base, kind of in the shadow of their National League neighbors. It had, funkiness and a little bit of grime and dirt, just like I remember Comiskey Park. So I started at the time just kind of photographing before games I was assigned to photograph. And I decided to photograph it in black and white because the Park Life book that I mentioned was photographed in black and white. So I used my iPhone, an app called Hipstamatic, which makes these beautiful square black and white images. So just in 2014, I would just wander around the ballpark for an hour or so before a game started and just collected images and just collecting them year after year after year after year. And it didn't really, it was kind of just doing it to share on social media, but also just for me, like kind of making up for the lost time at Comiskey Park. And then when, talk started coming of the A's building new stadiums, I'm like, okay, well, I'll do the story until the A's move to a new stadium. And then of course, as we all know, it switched to them leaving town. And then it became like the timeline changed dramatically. And, every year was like, is this the last year? Is this the last year? And then, of course, last year, 2024, was definitely the last year. So then I kind of made a more concerted effort to kind of photograph things I'd never photographed before. Since I'd been photographing mostly pregame,
hmm
I didn't get to photograph things like Bark in the Park, where they lift up the dogs in the middle of the Simba song or whatever it's called. And I also started to talk to fans, which I'd never done before. I got to know the Last Dive Bar group really well, and Oakland 68s, and the woman who makes the
Stomper
stomper
beanies. I knew
beanies.
what you were
Yeah,
going to say.
Kim.
Yeah.
Kim. Yeah. I'd always kind of done it like street photography, where I just kind of walked around stealing photos. But the last year, I decided to kind of photograph more of the people that I've come to know. And then the last week, the last homestand, I pitched to the Chronicle that I would just not shoot any action, just wander around the stadium
Yeah.
photographing. And so I kind of was doing it with my big camera in color, but also still with my iPhone. And then that kind of, finished off the book. And so I asked Brian from Last Dive Bar if I could steal baseball's Last Dive Bar as a title. And
Right.
I was like, absolutely, and so then I just started working with a couple of my friends who are world-class editors and designers putting the book together. And so I did a Kickstarter, which was successful. And so the book hopefully will be printed and done in the next month or so, and
Okay.
then be ready to get it out to there to the masses, hopefully.
So, corresponding with the start of baseball season, and yeah, we should point out the title of the book, Last Dive Bar, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with that group, but to your point, they were open to sharing that name, and I think it's obviously the perfect title for your book. At some point, and I can tell this gets emotional and sentimental for you because of your Comiskey connections, but also as you spent so much time at the Coliseum in the final years. Like you must have had a sentimental investment behind your photos here. And I'm just wondering at some point, maybe even when you were putting the book together and it's the same way I edited a little tribute video to the Coliseum. At some point you get super emotional just bringing back all the photos, almost as if this is a person that's passing away.
Absolutely. And it's just like I've come to love the place. I've always loved baseball and I've always loved stadiums. I was very lucky as a kid. My family, big sports fans, we would travel around the country. We'd go to All-Star games and World Series games for no random reason except just to go. And so I just love baseball, and it's such a beautiful photographic sport. And but yeah, I love the underdog. I've always loved the underdog. And so just seeing what the A's fans have gone through, and they've adopted me, which is fabulous. I'm a carpetbagger from Chicago, but it's wonderful that they've given me the opportunity to tell their story and document. But the hard thing was, I have at least 1,500 photos that I
Yeah,
love, and to
yeah.
edit it down to a couple hundred, even less than that, maybe 100, that was the most difficult one. And one of the cool experiences of the book was I was like, who could I get to write a foreword? And I remember hearing Tom Hanks being interviewed, that he was a vendor there as a teenager. And so I sent a couple photos and a letter asking him through his representation in LA if he could, consider writing the foreword.
You didn't think he would actually do it. You were taking your shot. Shoot or
Yes,
shoot, right?
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And I didn't hear anything for a month or so. And
Huh.
then one of my fellow photographers said, "Hey, you got a letter at the Chronicle sitting in the studio." And, I'm like, it's probably just some junk mail. So I didn't go there for like 3 weeks.
Oh,
And then I went in there and I opened it up really fast because I was still expecting it just to be some random thing. And it was a typed letter from Tom Hanks because he's a big typewriter fan. And
wow.
and you could tell he just typed it one way through, like
Yeah.
he didn't he like make a couple corrections, but I think that he just loves, the non-perfection, if that's not a word, the imperfection of typing. And so in the beginning of my book is I have the typed out letter from Tom Hanks, and it's delightful. You'll have to definitely pick up the book to read it because
Right.
just as an A's fan, he kind of goes through, some of the players he enjoyed seeing. And then at the end, he also gives some tips to vendors, not to sell dry goods only, peanuts and popcorn, and leave in the seventh inning. So
So you're
yeah,
saying he didn't even say yes or no to writing this forward. He just sent it right back to you and said, "I'm not
yep,
even going to say yes. I'm just going to give it to you.
yep,
Here it is."
yeah,
That's pretty
yeah.
cool.
He just sent a type letter back, and it
That
was
is pretty
just
cool.
what a great guy.
So, what do you hope this book accomplishes? And by the way, is Tom Hanks's words are those the only words in the book? Like visually, it's a photo book, right? It's all your
Yeah,
work, it's all your photos. There's no words to accompany it. But what do you hope this accomplishes?
yeah. So for me, it's kind of it's history, it's historical, but also it's a memory book, and also I think it's something that non-A's fan will enjoy because I think the photographs are interesting by themselves. Um, I think my favorite photo I took in the entire project was the final game after the Hall of Fame removed home plate.
Oh yeah,
That great image of the what like there's like burnt wood in
right.
place. I don't know exactly if that was always under there or they placed that in to fill up the hole, but it just kind of shot from straight above. It created this almost like burnt, broken heart. It just was very symbolic, I felt, of the whole um, demise of the A's in Oakland. And so it was just kind of images like that that I think work on many levels. They work as, just this is what happened, but also it kind of transports your feelings and your emotions from the whole event. But yeah, for me, it's just like for me, I still will look at the Park Life book that I have from this that was shot in the summer of 1977 at Comiskey Park, and just be like, oh, I remember those days,
Yeah.
and it just gives me a warm feeling, even though I was lucky as a White Sox fan that they did not leave town. They were rumored to leave to St. Pete at one point, and then they were saved by the governor at the last moment. But I cannot imagine what the Oakland A's fans are going through to lose their team, and then of course have it be so close but yet so far away. And so it's definitely a struggle. But I don't want to, I do think you kind of mentioned earlier it's going to take a while for people to process their feelings. So I hopefully, might be too raw still for some people, but I definitely think it's something that, in 10, 15, 20 years, the photos are just going to get better and better because it'll kind of fill in some of the lapses of people's memories.
One of the things I felt in doing all the studio shows for the final year, and I mean, like, we all knew what was coming, and I didn't know that my job was necessarily going to be ending as part of that until about halfway through, but I felt the need and the obligation to see all of this through. And I'm getting to you here in a second because I think you probably felt the same way. This is your talent. This is what you do with the camera. You document things. You help, capture a still frame of history and make sure that lives on forever. I felt almost obligated to do my job and see this through. And I'm sure that you must have felt as you were going out there. How many games did you probably attend to do this book? Like hundreds, if not thousands?
Oh, yeah, easily. I probably get to half the Oakland A's games a year, so at
It's a
least
lot.
100,
Yeah.
maybe 500 with some. I would go on my off days too, just so I could spend the whole day wandering around.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a lot of games.
Yeah, but you almost feel like you want to use your skill set to help document something. Was that part of the motivation? And again, it was your job. You were out here already, but I feel like I can kind of see it and read it that maybe you felt like, I don't know, this is your not donation to the cause, but like this is your contribution, I should say, to the whole
Yes.
situation. Feel like
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
accurate?
Yeah, no, when it got into like the eighth, ninth seasons that I were photographing out there, I kind of felt like, okay, it's my job to be the visual record keeper of the Coliseum now.
That's it. Yeah.
And so it definitely, there was, and then when you start meeting the people and they start recognizing you, and like that's like what was such an honor, and everyone, like, oh my God, what salt of the earth people, just the
Yeah.
most wonderful group. And um that's where I get emotional. It's just thinking of just all the just the stabs in the back constantly over and over that this fan base has had to endure. But just wonderful memories though overall. And then at the end I started asking. I never had asked for any sort of access using my press pass. I always photographed mostly in places that other fans could go.
Right.
But at the end I asked if I could go inside the scoreboard during a game. And so the last week I went inside one of the out of town scoreboards. And the coolest thing for me, kind of tying it all together, was leaning against the wall was Chicago White Sox, CWS, and a bunch of numbers. And so, I snuck in my White Sox tribute into the book. But it's baseball fans, they're a dying breed, and it just isn't, fast enough for the younger generations, being an old man now looking back. But it's definitely, for me, an honor to have spent the time I did at the
Yeah.
Coliseum, and kind of be trusted, and like the ushers too, like they were just all like, some places they get a little squirrely about having photos taken in the stands, but everyone was fabulous, and it just was, the experience was a gift to me.
Yeah. So let's make sure we promote and push the book here because everybody's been interested in this. Now we've talked about it, but early April, and where can you buy it? And I'm assuming that it's out forever, right? Like there's probably rounds of publishing. And so if they do sell out, which maybe could happen, there'll be more rounds. How's this going to go?
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. So I'm originally getting a run of 300 books, and I think about maybe 175 of them have already been pre-ordered.
Wow.
So right now I'm not quite as organized as I should be. But once the book is printed, I will probably, create a website where people can just go and order it right there.
Okay.
But if not, just reach out to Scott Strazzanti on social media. and and you can still pre-order the book. And really the pre-orders and the orders after it starts are all going to be, the same. So you're not going to miss out. There's not going to be like, oh, sorry, pre-orders are done. So it's just try to reach out to me on social
Yeah.
media. I had a handy dandy, email address website to give you, but I don't.
And to go through you, right? So at this point,
Yeah, go through me.
nowhere else.
Yeah.
You're the person to
Yeah.
contact. All right,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Yeah, it's the easiest way to do it.
All right, Scott. Well, I hope this book goes really well, and I think, like we talked about before, it's going to last the test of time. It's going to stand the test of time because this is now a history book. Unfortunately, it's not a feature book; it's a history book, and I appreciate you for doing the work on this and documenting it so that generations on can get a taste. Really hard thing to say, but you did a great job, Scott. Thank you so much.
Of course, Brody. My pleasure. All right. Thank you.